Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the 2024 NFL Draft Class review of the Cincinnati Bengals. That's right, we're going to be looking at every single pick based on production, athleticism, and other statistical factors to kind of see how well they might turn out in the future. So stay tuned until the end of the video before we reveal what the final grade is for the Bengals. But we have to learn a couple things before we get there. First off, draft approximate value or draft pick approximate value. What is that? Well, draft pick approximate value is the average AV or value score for where a player is selected. So essentially, if you pick a player between picks 1 through 5, the average AV of that prospect is about a 98.84 out of 100 prospect, which essentially is like a Hall of Fame level prospect. That's expected. When you pick a player from 1 to 5, you're expected to get that. But as you pick lower down the totem pole, the chances of success get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So, when I evaluate draft picks, I evaluate them based on where they were selected, because where they were selected can influence their chances of success, but also I want to see what their data grade is, because typically players that have higher data grades that are selected in the bottom end of the draft typically outperform that status. So, what is a data grade? A data grade is what I call EAV, or expected approximate value grade, also known as a ceiling grade. Takes a look at athleticism, production, physical metrics, everything you could think of from a statistical standpoint, all into one. It's like RAS if RAS had production and strength of schedule and strength of team and just everything all in one is what it is. And based on those data parameters, typically a prospect that has a 70 or higher production score with EAV typically becomes a long-term starter. About 86 to 90 or even more, depending on the position, typically become really great players if they have at least a 70 or higher data grade. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to be a great player if they have a 70 or higher grade, but it does increase their chances of that potentially happening. And if you want to learn more about this data, how I get these scores, the correlations with them, you can check out my top 50 prospects video, which is on this channel. You can check that out and learn more about that. But in terms of a last thing to mention before we get to the actual Cincinnati Bengals needs, limiting factors, what are some of the things that can affect the data? Because I like to just tell you, like, okay, what are some of the things that could happen to throw off the data? Well, one thing is the coaching of a team can affect the development or lack of development of a prospect. If Tyreek Hill had went to any team other than the Kansas City Chiefs, would he be Tyreek Hill? Maybe not. If he hadn't gone to a team that was willing to develop him, he may not have become who he became. Same thing goes with unforeseen injuries. The Bengals know this very well. There were numerous players like Carson Palmer. Of course, you have a lot of the linebacker, of course, from USC, for example, and Keith Rivers. All those prospects had injuries that kind of ended their careers or really diminished their careers in a lot of ways. So that can affect things. Substitution bias. This allows for the possibility that coaches switch from a higher costing prospect to a lower costing prospect, but lower quality. So you can have a player who's starting for you, but he's not really the best prospect, but they don't have a choice because they didn't want to pay the other guy and he left. That can happen. Also, psychological and mental makeup can affect things. If you don't have a good psyche and good mental makeup, it can definitely affect the numbers as well. And then, of course, there's, media market stuff. But overall, these are the things that can affect the data, which I think you should know about if you're going to be coming in this with a full mind towards it. Okay. Now, getting to the needs of the Cincinnati Bengals, which everybody's going to debate these needs, but these are just facts. Okay. This is NFL positional value. So these are all the prospects based on their approximate value score that they've averaged per year for the Bengals. And these are the top performers. This doesn't mean that they're the best players, okay? Because yes, film-wise they might be terrible, but these are all the players that have been doing really well for them in terms of AV, okay? The numbers on the right are the data grades. So the data grades essentially looks at what they were based on their college football data grades, essentially. you know, their pre-draft grade is essentially what that is, which is the same thing as the data grades I use. So if you wanted to know what those data grades were for the prospects that you're seeing right here, you can see them on the right. Okay. Now, based on that information that I just looked at, these are the biggest needs that I see the Cincinnati Bengals having. They need wide receiver help. They need tight end help, especially big time. They need offensive line help. Those are big needs for the Bengals. Also, in terms of defense, they need edge help. They need defensive tackles. Linebackers, not so much, but they definitely need safety help. Those are big needs that they have in terms of their defense, which hopefully they address in the draft. Now, biggest factors in terms of my final grade. Did they meet their roster needs? That's a big thing. Biggest needs I see are wide receiver, running back, safety, cornerback, and edge. Did they draft good prospects? Because if you don't draft good prospects or prospects that have really good data grades, or at least above average data grades, they're more likely not going to become a starter, and then it's like a wasted pick in many ways for that. So definitely, did you draft good data prospects? Also, did you draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? So the biggest thing with data grades is this, guys, just to remember this, is that the lower you go in the draft, the more important it is that you get a prospect that has a good data grade. Because more often than not, the players that outperform their draft status in the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round had great data grades. And the ones that didn't became absolutely nothing. So if you're going to draft players in the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round, they need to have good data grades. That is crucial. It's really important that they have those things for them. So, with all those questions about data out of the way, let's get you drafting I should say, grading their draft class. So, starting with the first pick, they picked Amarius Mims, offensive tackle out of Georgia. He was their first pick. He probably is their best pick. He has a 99.35 data grade in terms of his ceiling, so really high grade. Elite physical metrics, elite athleticism traits in many ways, great side, everything you would want in an offensive tackle, he has. The floor grade for him is 89.80 out of 100. The floor grade is what the average AV is for offensive lineman taken where he was taken with his data grade. So this is like the worst case scenario of what is closer to like maybe reality for him in terms of his data. And then the balance grade is essentially uh, his floor plus his ceiling added together to give that. And then, of course, you have pick AV, which is his approximate value for his selection. So if you randomly picked a player at pick 18, they typically would have a 94.59 approximate value score. That is the expectation with this pick. And I feel like they met that expectation. So I think this definitely is an A for them. Also looking at his athleticism traits, as I mentioned before, 95 percentile in terms of speed with above average explosiveness for his size. Fantastic numbers overall for him, and I'm really excited to see what he does on the Bengals. Now, this is where things get a little funky. So, pick 49, Chris Jenkins Jr., defensive tackle out of Michigan. Based on his data grade, he had a 74.21 out of 100. His floor grade is 57.52, and his balance grade is 65.86 out of 100. And then most likely, I would say most picks taken at pick 49 usually have an 81.85 out of 100 approximate value score. So I would give this overall pick a C. When you look at his ceiling, he could become a starter. But when you look at his floor and you look at his balance grade, there's a lot of question marks here. And there's a lot of iffiness with his profile. So let's take a look at his statistical profile here. So in terms of defensive market share data, when you look at his data, he had an elite solo tackle production score with significantly below average sack and TFL production. Just ridiculous. He tested like Maisie Smith, the nose tackle from last year that the Cowboys drafted. So this is very concerning as a prospect because he didn't get any sacks, he didn't get any tackles for loss. He did get good solo tackles, so there might be some outlier potential here. I mean, I'm going to give you that. Now, when you get to his other market share production scores, his interception market share, not that great, 80 plus percentile there, but his forced fumbles and pass deflections, yeah, not really there for him. When you get to athleticism traits, though, he did test well in terms of explosiveness, with near elite speed for his size, but his flexibility was not the best. So kind of stiff, doesn't really have great change of direction skills. I don't really know if that has to do with his ability as a pass rusher, but you never know. So that's kind of how he tested in terms of athleticism. And in terms of his adjusted production traits, he's closer to a starter than a Pro Bowl and All Pro defensive tackle. So I don't see elite level potential out of him, but he could become a starter. So I'm going to give the Bengals that he could become a starter, but at the same time, you could have done better. Okay, you could have took a less risky prospect here. Now, in terms of pick 80, Jermaine Burton, wide receiver out of Alabama, his data grade or ceiling is 76.8, 76.69 out of 100. His projected floor is 65.58, which means all the wide receivers that tested like him, where he was picked at, typically had a 65.58 approximate value score long term. His balance grade is 71.13, and the average AV for where he was selected is 64.86 out of 100. I would give this overall pick grade a C. Taking a look at his data, his market share production scores were above average, but not exactly elite or close to the starter averages, which is not what you want to see. He did have great efficiency scores, though. He had a 60 percentile yards per reception score and a really great TD percentage. So he didn't have the best market share production, but he did have very good efficiency scores, which is a positive thing to see out of him. Now, when you get to athleticism traits, he did have 86 percentile in terms of explosiveness and above average speed. And when you look at his adjusted production traits, 59 percentile in terms of his age, 80 percentile in terms of his MSA rating, and 85 percentile in terms of his pass rating at the position. So he is kind of, he's above the starter averages at the position, but this is a very risky pick. It's not even about the character concerns because I know a lot of people have brought that up, but when people talk about character concerns, they usually bring up Randy Moss. They usually bring up Warren Sapp. You know what Warren Sapp did on the football field? He put up 90 plus percentile production, and he was a 90 plus percentile athlete. You know what Randy Moss did with his character concerns? He put up 90 plus percentile production with 90 plus percentile athleticism traits. Typically speaking, when people bring up character about a prospect, look at their production. If they were extremely productive, had great athleticism, and everything else in terms of the whole package, but they have these character issues, you take those players. You don't take players that have character concerns and they're an iffy prospect from a data perspective. That's the issue with this pick. So I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give him what his data potential is, which has a potential starter. I mean, he does have the potential to become a long-term starter for the Cincinnati Bengals, but he didn't have elite traits. So there are some concerns here. Could he become a starter? Absolutely. But I think he might be more of a headache than an asset based on his overall data profile. That's all I'm saying about him. All right. Now, get to pick 97. McKinley Jackson, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M. 46 percentile in terms of his data grade, 42 percentile in terms of his floor, 44.36 in terms of his balance grade, and most picks taken here are 60.23 out of 100. That's not a good selection to make. Now, based on his production traits, they weren't bad. 72 percentile in terms of solo tackle data with, above average sack data and above average TFL data. Not a bad profile to have, sort of a run stuffer, if you will. In terms of his other production traits, he did a little bit, decent in terms of forced fumbles and interceptions. But his athleticism is not exactly where you want it to be. He had above average speed, above average flexibility, but below average explosiveness for his size. So he doesn't have elite level athleticism traits, and his production isn't really much to say either. And then when you get to his adjusted production traits, look at his age, look at his MSA, look at his pass score, look at the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, the All Pro averages of the position. He doesn't hit any of those areas. So could he become a starter? Yeah, maybe, but most likely based on his overall profile, I don't really see those outcomes for him based on his overall data. Next up, we have pick 115, Eric All, tight end from Iowa. His data grade is 80.74 out of 100. He had a 38.14 floor grade. This is just all the tight ends where he was drafted at typically had a 38 percentile overall grade for how he tested. So all the 80 percentile tight ends typically did that where he was drafted. His balance grade is 59.44, and the average AV or where he was selected is 55.98 out of 100. Overall, I would give this pick grade a B, and the reason why is when you look at that ceiling grade, again, take prospects that have above average data grades when you're talking about the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round, because they're going to have a higher chance of hitting. Most prospects picked at 115 end up becoming backups or worse. So he has the potential to become a starter based on his overall data profile. So that's a win. That's a win, however you look at it. And based on his production, he had good production traits. He had a decent touchdown production score in the 85 percentile. Taking a look at his efficiency scores, he did well efficiently as well. Hit within the starter Pro Bowl averages there as well. Athleticism-wise, he had above average athleticism. Now, this is based on his estimated speed score from NFLDraftScout.com, based on his estimated 40-yard dash, okay? And in terms of his adjusted production traits, his age score is very low, but his MSA rating and his pass rating are decent. So is he a boomer bust prospect? Yes, but he does have all the traits you're looking for to potentially become a starting tight end, and he was a fourth rounder. So that's a win, however you look at it, in my book. He does have that data potential to outperform his draft status, which is what you're supposed to draft in the draft. Okay. Next up, we have Josh Newton, cornerback out of TCU. Data grade or ceiling, 54.44 out of 100. Floor, 39.47. Balanced, 46.96. His pick AV or average AV for where he was selected is 42.47 out of 100. This pick grade is a big fat F, okay? Data grade is nowhere near where you want it to be, especially for a prospect pick at pick 149. Now, when you get to his market share scores, they're okay. Good pass deflection data, indicative of like a man corner who doesn't really get to make plays on the football that much. That's kind of what this data profile says. I don't know if that's what he was on film, but that's what his data says about him. Now, when you get to athleticism traits, not the best athlete. There was a lot of bad athlete corners in this class, so I'm not going to rag on him too hard, but didn't have the best athleticism. Average speed, slightly above average flexibility, not exactly all the numbers that you want to hit. But the biggest issue is his age. Very low age score in the 10 percentile. His overall pass score is not exactly where you want it to be. Overall, as was seen before, he is somebody who has a very bad data grade, and these are just not the numbers that you want to hit overall for him. Next up, we have pick 194 in Tanner McLaughlin, tight end out of Arizona. His data grade or ceiling would be 71.54 out of 100. His floor grade would be 29.48 out of 100, with a balanced grade of 50.51 out of 100. The overall AV for him would be 15.44 out of 100, which is typically what you would expect to get out of a prospect like this. So remember what I said at the very beginning of the video. The Bengals needed tight end help, or they really needed it. And they've drafted two tight ends so far. One of them, Eric Hall, does have potential to become a really good tight end, although he does have some concerns in terms of his age. And Tanner McLaughlin has potential to be a starting tight end as well, with a 71 percentile data grade. So this was a pretty decent pick for them here. Now, in terms of his overall market share production, not the best, near the starter averages, but not exactly there. When you take a look at his efficiency scores, not as efficient as Eric All, but not, he's below average in terms of his efficiency. So there's really not much else to say about that. Taking a look at athleticism traits, he did have near elite speed for his size, with below average flexibility and average explosiveness. So his athleticism is a little inconsistent, but he does have decent speed at the position, which I think could be beneficial for him. And then, of course, when you look at adjusted production traits, did okay, closer to the starter averages in terms of this. I would say overall, Tanner McLaughlin has the potential to be a starting tight end for the Bengals. Is he going to be a great tight end? Probably not. Probably closer to just a regular starter, but not a bad pick this late. Really not in terms of where he was selected. Then we get to pick 214, Cedric Johnson, edge out of Ole Miss. His data grade is 70.10 out of 100. Projected floor grade is 29.36. Balance grade is 49.73 with a 33.98 AV score. I would give this overall pick grade a C based on his data grade ceiling. When you look at his overall data here, there are a lot of positives to glean from that, if you will. Starting with his market share data, it wasn't the best. Below average in terms of solo tackle data, average sack data and average TFL data. These are not the numbers that you want to hit at the position there. Now, in terms of efficiency scores, he did well in terms of pass deflection market share, which is a positive. But when you look at athleticism, he did do well there as well, 96 percentile explosiveness with 88 percentile speed. But when you look at his overall adjusted production traits, he's closer to a starter than he is an all-pro player. So I don't really have a big concern with this pick. You picked him here. It's good value. I mean, again, because he does have the potential to become a starter, but his overall market share data is not really indicative of a starter. So he could become one, he could not. We'll kind of see what happens with him. But overall, not a bad selection, but not necessarily the best ever selection for him. Then we get to pick 224 in Dejon Anthony, safety out of Liberty. Data grade or ceiling is 52.76 out of 100. His floor grade is 38.06. His balance grade is 45.41 out of 100. And his average pick AV for where he was selected is 6.95 out of 100. Most seventh rounders don't do anything at the NFL level, okay? Now, his overall grade would be an F. And the reason why is because his data grade is 52 percentile and he's in the seventh round. You will rarely ever see 52 percentile cornerbacks taken in the seventh round become anything, or safeties, I should say. Any position, really, will do anything when you get to that. So, taking a look at his data, he had above average pass deflection data, which is a positive for him. And in terms of athleticism traits, he had above average flexibility. Not the best thing ever, but when you look at his adjusted production traits, average age with some concerns overall with his overall adjusted production traits. But this is not what you want to see out of the position here. But we'll see what happens with them. And then the last pick we'll mention is probably one of my favorite picks, which is Matt Lee, center out of Miami. Why did you fall so far, my son? When you look at his data grade, he had 84.71 out of 100. His floor is 38.06. His balance grade is 45.41 out of 100. And the AV for where he was selected is 1.54 out of 100. Overall pick grade, I would say, would be a B. But again, he has the potential to be an 84 percentile center at that position, which is fantastic. So this was a very good selection for him, and I think he will add a lot of value for them long term for them. And athleticism-wise, great athleticism traits, 80 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 80 percentile in terms of speed, and above average flexibility. So hits all the numbers that you want to hit in terms of him. Which gets us to the final grade. I would give the Bengals a D. Okay, I'm going to get some flack here, but it is what it is. Did they meet all their roster needs? I would say yes and no. They took a lot of boom and bust prospects, a lot of prospects that have a lot of question marks, a lot of prospects that you are gambling. You're gambling on prospects. It's kind of like, all right, instead of putting your card, or I should say, instead of putting your chips on black, okay, you decided to put them on 22. That's what you did. That is the equivalent of what you did in this draft. So instead of taking a player where it's, black or red, you decided to go, you know what? I think I'm going to put it on 22. That's what you did. You drastically decrease your chances of hitting on these prospects. Now, is probability certainty? No. I can't be 100% certain that all these draft picks are going to turn out the way that the data said they were going to turn out. I can't say that at all. But based on the vast majority of data work that I've done, based on the picks they selected, where they were selected, where they went, all that information right there, I just don't like this draft class from that kind of perspective, okay? Excuse me. Now, did they draft good prospects? Yes and no. They drafted some good. Amirius Mims is a good prospect. They had Matt Lee is a good prospect. Eric All, he's a good prospect. I mean, they drafted some good prospects, but all in all, it was yes and no. And some of them are iffy. So there's concerns there. Now, did they draft prospects that had the data potential to outperform their draft status? Yes and no. Matt Lee, for example, Eric All, for example. So they took some prospects that could outperform their draft status, but overall, the Bengals had the 23rd best draft class. There are a lot of risky prospects in this class and too much risk to grade this class higher than what you would want. So that is my overall thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals draft class. I want to know what you guys think. Leave a comment in the comment section below on how well you thought the Bengals did in this draft class. Check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, consider subscribing to my X, formerly known as Twitter account, at Geometrics. And I love you guys so much for watching. Please stay tuned until the next video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.